Hello, I am Chloe Behrens, and today I will be doing a review over the 1995 biographical film about President Harry Truman. In this review, I will discuss several strengths in this movie that I feel accurately represent Truman and his presidency. I will also point out some aspects of the film that may not be as accurate. First, let me start by assessing several strengths I recognize throughout this film. The scene where Truman is sworn into the presidency, I think this scene was well done and accurately conveyed Truman's nervousness about becoming president. Understanding the weight of this job, it is known that Truman really never wanted to become the president. Using an actual quote from Truman, which is revealed in page 18 of the Dalek book, saying he felt as the moon, the stars, and the planets had all fallen on me. I think including this does do a great job of showing that he did not want to assume this responsibility. To show this further, a letter from Truman himself, retrieved from the Chappelle documents, reveals that Truman went as far as to say that life in the White House was like a jail to him. I think another good scene that accurately showed Truman's efforts with foreign policy, along with his struggle to maintain positive relations and cooperation with Soviets after World War II, when he writes to Bess, "We are three old men walking in a graveyard, planning a brave new world, and we're haggling like a bunch of old women." In Dalek's biography on page 22, it reveals that Truman, in fact, did have his doubts about being able to get along with them. Another thing I like that the film highlighted was Truman's loyalty in several parts of this film, but specifically in the defense of the ideals set forth by the late President Roosevelt. In the film, it shows a campaign speech done by President Truman where he criticizes the do-nothing worst in history Republic Congress for not supporting things such as education, civil rights, health insurance, housing, and more. His criticisms of the Republican Congress are corroborated by Dalek's book on page 79. The last thing I want to point out is the movie's effectiveness in showing the public backlash Truman received during his presidency at several points in this film. One that stood out to me was the public's outrage over firing General MacArthur, shown when even Truman's own mother-in-law criticizes him for firing one of the country's greatest heroes. A letter from Truman to one of his colleagues retrieved from the Chappelle documents reveals Truman's struggles with this, as he writes, "You have been a tower of strength to me in all my trials and tribulations." Now that I have touched on some of the strengths, I will now point out some areas of weakness in this film that I feel did not accurately represent Truman and his presidency based on historical records. First, I want to point out the inaccuracy of the scene where Truman discusses his reasoning for dropping the atomic bombs on Japan. The film makes it seem as though Truman is only concerned with ending the war quickly in order to save more lives. However, Dalek on pages 24 through 27 reveals that beyond saving lives, Truman also wanted to maintain the public's confidence by sticking to Roosevelt's agenda for the war, being that he was the one who initially approved the making of the bombs. Also, he hoped that by doing this, it would intimidate the Soviets. And lastly, he just wanted revenge, saying it was nothing more than what they deserved after the atrocities that took place during World War II. Following the end of the war, a scene of celebration takes place in the film where Truman states that he intends to take the atomic bomb out of the hands of the military and discuss with scientists on how to use them for peaceful pursuits. But in the Dalek book on page 115, it reveals that Truman did not do this and fully intended on using the bombs for military use. And as he asked Congress to expand the military's atomic arsenal in preparation for a third world war. Something important that this film does not do is highlight Truman's own domestic anti-communist efforts. They fail to show that Truman did have a part in adding to the domestic fear by exaggerating the communist threat. They also did not include the Truman Doctrine, which was pretty surprising to me, being that it was an important part of the anti-communist fight. Another criticism I have of the movie is that it portrays decisions Truman made in regards to situations such as Palestine and civil rights as more of a moral obligation. However, Dalek shows on page 64 that Truman, being a politician, was also influenced by his need for their votes. The last weakness in this film that I will touch on was how they portrayed Truman himself. I think they could have done a better job of emphasizing Truman's outspoken personality and his sensitivity to criticism. The film does lightly touch on this when he responds to a music critic after slamming his daughter's music performance, but it did not accurately show Truman's tendency to use more crude language. A letter to Atkinson retrieved from the Chappelle documents provides a better insight to Truman's personality, saying he wanted to punch the publisher and more violently states any SOB who tried to shoot me would get a gun shoved up his behind and I would pull the trigger. Overall, I thought this was a fine film that for the most part successfully represented Truman in his time as president. There were aspects that I think could have been done better and more things that could have been included to make it a more accurate representation, but I still thought that it was a pretty good film that highlighted the successes and failures of President Truman.